Okay. I want to thank KXSW and Tom Wilson for taking the time to give me the opportunity to share a little bit about what's happening. As most of you know, I am the District 1 representative, House of Representatives, and I'm working on legislation in Pierre for this upcoming session. And the bill in particular that I want to share tonight is Bill number 1269. And what it's about is it is to waive the statute of limitations for a 2-year period for criminal action for survivors of sexual abuse in boarding schools. And so some of the survivors and the different groups out there that have worked on them, one of them is the 9 sisters, and they are ladies, they're Native women that had attended Marty Boarding School, or at the time it was St. Paul's Mission. And much of what happened there was also what happened up here at Tekawitha Boarding School here. So they are the generation above myself. They are our parents, our grandparents. Some of them have passed on. Some of them have, over the years, shared their stories with me. I think of Howard Wana. I think of Mary Catherine and so many others that I see on a daily basis even that have survived this and have been impacted by this experience in their childhood. And it's my feeling, for many years, I've often thought them sharing their stories with me, what am I going to do with this? You know, what am I going to do with all the things that they've shared with me? And now there comes a time when there is something that I can do, and I am able to work on this legislation that would allow them to finally seek justice, seek acknowledgement of what had happened to them, and maybe they would be able to move on and heal from this. One of the points that I've been making is that often we see young people, generations now, that are in recovery, that are healing from addiction, meth being such a terrible monster in our community. And it's often the first time that they have ever encountered prayer or spirituality. And I think, I can't help but think that it's because we have this disconnect. Those generations that have a grandparent, a parent that went through that experience with the church, the boarding schools, they effectively have cut off spirituality. They no longer attend church. They have lost their faith, and they are not, bringing those things in, to the next generations. And it's such a vital part of recovery. Prayer, whether it be traditional spirituality, or whether it be Christian, to have prayer and faith and love for the Creator is such a very important thing. So this is something that impacts a lot of different ways. And where Gabe DeRosier comes into this is as a singer and a songwriter and somebody that is well known across Indian country. The lady for the women from Wagner and from Yankton, their last name is Dufany. And Michelle has reached out to you through the University of Minnesota and had asked you to share a song.
Yes.
And she wants to do, they have some interviews that these ladies have done, and they are going to use the song. But it's also going to be shared for all of the survivors. The people like my father, the people like, again, Howard Wana and so many others. And I really feel like it's almost like a prayer for them all. It's an acknowledgement for all of them. So would you share a little bit about the song and why it's special?
Absolutely. First of all, my name is, my Indian name is Miskulinyu, which means Red Eagle. and I'm from the Bear Clan, Makwa and Indotem. And that's how we always begin when we do talks or when someone requests of you to be a part of something. And they always say, you know, our relatives and our ancestors always say that things happen for a reason. And, you know, things happen to where people come together, you know, to work towards a goal or an issue that's going on in our lives and Indian country. And so, yes, Michelle Dufnoy, or Dufene, reached out to me just the other day and said, could I help her out with a song, a special song for survivors of the boarding schools here in the USA, and also recognizing the residential school victims in Canada. As you may know or very well be aware of, in 1960s there was such a thing that was called the 60s scoop in Canada, where authorities and the Canadian government just went into Indian country, blatantly stealing kids and removing them, sometimes forever, never to be seen again. And so we are talking about that, about the victims of the residential school, the boarding schools here. As we know, it's a long history of that impact towards Native America, Native children, Native communities. So when I learned about that from Michelle asking for that song, I automatically came to the song that I composed a while back. And it was requested through an individual in Canada. He was working on the residential school survivors there. He was organizing an event at the Manitowoc International Powwow in Winnipeg, where he wanted us to sing that special song for residential school victims. And long story short, that didn't happen because he had passed away, and his project kind of just didn't, you know, come to fruition. But anyway, we still had that song, and we had, within the years, we have been had the opportunity to sing that boarding school song for various communities and events that recognizes boarding school and residential school survivors. So we have used it, and it's also in one of our albums that we have put together, and it's called the album's called November Winds, and the song is called Boarding School. So and it's still there, and in any event, I feel truly honored to share that with the group and their hopes of recognizing survivors of the boarding school and the residential schools here and throughout. So that's a little, kind of like a little history about the song itself. I grew up in the tail end of the residential school system myself, where we went to a day Catholic school. And those practices of boarding school life was touching. Things that happened during the day schools wasn't probably that much different from being at a boarding school, you know, 24/7. And so and it does impact, it has impacted lives. You know, my mother, God bless her heart, she was in a boarding school with all her brothers, and you know, we're products of that boarding school and residential school impact. And I seen them become alcoholics. I seen them cry when they were drunk, and that's all they did was drink until their death. So. And we never heard the stories, just the sorrow, just the impacts of whatever they suffered in those places back then. So I've seen it. I've seen the damage, and I've seen what it does to families. You know, the next intergenerational trauma.
I think, yeah, some of the stories that have been shared with me too, and I, even though I would try to do those things justice, it would be very hard for me to truly express the way that they shared with me. But when they're saying things like, how do you ever, how do you show love to somebody else if nobody ever showed love to you? So, and that's a very base thing. But even beyond that, much less adverse, the trauma of sexual abuse, or even just the impact of just the experience of being there, the feeling of abandonment or physical abuse. In one instance, a person had shared with me that came from a family with grandparents that were, and I know who they are in history. They were people that worked with the church. They were well respected. They were farmers, and it was a good life. He went from a very good life to an environment where he said that he didn't understand why they were hurting them, and why it was wrong to speak your language, or much less some of the darker things that occurred to him there. Unfortunately, that individual had people that were able to take him away from there. But to this day, the feeling, like some others have said, I think about this every day. There's not a day that passes. I could be working on my car. I could be out with the horses. I could be, one woman with my grandchildren. And I think of it. I think of what had occurred. And the stories go on, and it's really not about the stories so much at this point, but how maybe we can do something that would allow them to move forward, and that healing, a return to spirituality in a way that they haven't. I think those things are extremely important for all generations.
I totally agree. Those are lifelong impacts, traumatic experiences. And it is a good question. And how do we reconcile? How do we say to ourselves or forgive ourselves for stuff like that? It's bad things that happened to us and our families. And how do we return to or reclaim our spirituality as a people? How do we introduce that to people who are in the middle of dealing with traumatic experiences like sexual assault and alcoholism and drugs and you name it? How do we help our people to return to the way and the life that was given to us by the Creator? That is a tough thing. Those are tough questions. I know the Canadian government had created this reconciliation program with First Nations up in Canada. They even went as far as apologizing for the trauma and the residential school that happened in Canada, including the 60s scoop. And they've been trying to compensate the victims and the survivors of boarding school by, giving them so much monetary amounts of the years they spent in these places. And as we know, any amount, it could be 3-5 million, would never account for the experiences they went through, and the impacts, the trauma that they carry within themselves and is passed on to their families.
And I really don't know, it's my belief that there are some that are alive today, that of that generation, and that they may not wish to pursue any sort of suit, but just knowing that it is not that they, as that generation, are no longer blocked from justice. And I can't imagine what that would feel like to be dealing with what had occurred to you and know that a law was put into place that specifically bars you from ever seeking justice. And if this would be a way to alleviate that forever on, I think that it would be a good thing for them. And again, I want to tell you thank you for sharing the song, and we will be sharing it. I know that there's other media going to be out there, but I wanted to be sure that we here, right here in this region of Northeast South Dakota, where my relatives and those that have shared these things with me, and this is a very personal thing to this community. It's a very personal thing to this community, for all of our grandparents, our fathers, all of them, all of the children that are remembered by the monument out at Memorial Park, all of them. So, I want to thank you for that.
Absolutely, yes. And I just wanted to make mention that, we are a spiritual-based people. All Native Americans have this spirituality that we know and understand. And one of the big pieces about acknowledging that is our ability to communicate with, the spirit world through song and dance. And when we're able to sing songs and dance to songs, we are acknowledging our relationship with the spirits. And with this song, it is the same thing. We acknowledge the survivors of the boarding school and residential school system by singing this song and, uplifting their hearts and their minds and their souls whenever they hear it and when they're able to dance to that song. It's a great honor to do that.
Thank you. And thank you, Tom.